Some Missouri fans have held a grudge against Purdue coach Matt Painter over the years, but you know what? I really don't think that's fair, and I want to explain why right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso, and a man who got 3 out of 4 right in the Final Four in his bracket, yes, including the NC State Wolfpack. But coming up on today's program, I want to talk about an Iowa Hawkeyes point guard who visited Columbia this past weekend, and also why the Alabama Crimson Tide made their first Final Four here this past weekend. That easily could have been Missouri in 2012. I want to make an easy comparison there, in my opinion. But first, I do want to tell you guys that this episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. And here's the thing with Matt Painter and their relationship, and his relationship, I should say, with Missouri fans. Let's actually go back 13 years now to March of 2011, after Mike Anderson had left Missouri for the Arkansas Razorbacks. Kim English famously, his quote was, "We're going to reconcile by winning." Well, after that, Mike Alden had to reconcile this situation by finding a new Missouri basketball coach, and his first move was to find young Matt Painter at the time. And it really is hard to believe, in my brain anyway, that at that time, 40-year-old Matt Painter, younger than I am today. Boy, time is just kind of a funny thing. But Alden met with Painter and his family while they were on vacation following Purdue's season down in Orlando. Painter said, "I was very impressed with the Missouri administration, Mike Alden, how professional he was. And I think it would be out of line for me to even talk on that. We had discussions. We had lengthy discussions, but I'm not going to get into the particulars of it just out of respect for Missouri." So first of all, that's kind of interesting in retrospect, more than a no comment there from Matt Painter, to be sure. And in this Columbia Tribune piece here from Steve Walentic here from 2011, he says sources close to Painter said the coach had enough questions about Purdue's commitment to winning that he was seriously considering the opportunity to make a move to Missouri. In the past few days, he even contacted Missouri high school coaches to gauge the recruiting potential at the state. And again, Walentic continues here. Painter spent Tuesday night and yesterday morning thinking over the decision, ultimately choosing to remain at the school. He has led to at least 25 victories in each of the past 4 seasons. And by the way, it sounded like Missouri was more than willing to give Matt Painter a pay raise of up to $2 million, which they were also willing to pay Mike Anderson reportedly at the time. Of course, $2 million these days, that's about half of what Dennis Gates is making. So that just tells you where salaries have gone in this sport. And Matt Painter himself makes over $3.6 million this past season. So it sure seems like to me that Matt Painter mostly wanted the Purdue administration to step its game up in terms of the assistant coach's salary pool, other expenditures, that type of thing. And sure seems like Matt Painter used some of his leverage and got what he wanted. And also, you know what? After playing at Purdue for 4 years, after being its head coach since 2005, 6-7 years at that point, the only major program he had ever known, or probably will know at this point, he's probably a lifer as a Boilermaker, certainly after getting to the Final Four here. Also 5 Big Ten titles for Matt Painter as well. So again, I think ultimately it's kind of hard to get mad at Matt Painter, a guy who, again, this is his alma mater. This is where he was the hand-picked successor of Gene Cady. This is all he's ever known in his life. So in a world where sports fans are obviously wanting more loyalty, who could have been more loyal to his alma mater than Matt Painter? And if he needed to push the administration around a little bit to get what he wants and hopefully get a few more Big Ten titles and wins for the Boilermakers, if you're one of their fans, well, I can't see how you can be mad at him if you're a Boilermaker fan. And obviously, if you're a Missouri fan, sure, it's disappointing. And it's disappointing to look back and think, boy, I bet Matt Painter would have done a lot better job over the last 13 years than the conglomeration of Missouri coaches that we've had over the last few years. That's pretty obvious. That's a pretty obvious take for sure. It's also interesting to see, though, some of the other potential targets mentioned by Walentic in his Tribune piece. VCU's Shaka Smart, who is now at Marquette, previously at Texas. Xavier coach Chris Mack, Northern Iowa coach Ben Jacobson. Of course, Chris Mack has had an interesting twists and turns throughout his career as a head coach. But obviously, the most notable part there of that to me, again, Shaka Smart, 33 years old at that point. No Frank Haith mentioned. And I think that's the biggest takeaway here, is that Missouri, Mike Alden, I think it's fair to wonder if they just didn't have a very good plan B all the way back in 2011, because obviously Alden felt like he had Painter, had a really good shot at him anyway. I think that's pretty obvious. Now, I would love to actually ask Mike Alden this question. Maybe he'd tell me I'm full of crap, but it sure seemed like that was his plan A, and there really wasn't much of a plan B, a quick pivot out of basically nowhere to Frank Haith, and we can debate all day about how successful Haith's run was or not. The bottom line is his teams objectively on paper got worse in all three of his seasons. Excuse me. And by that third season, really those guys, while we had some talent, Jabari Brown, Jordan Clarkson, Jonathan Williams, that just didn't really look like a team by that third season. Those guys were basically like ships passing in the night. So while on paper that's a much better team than we've had, that last Haith team than we've had in a lot of these recent years, still just felt like it was going in the wrong direction. But regardless, I think at this point, if you're a Missouri fan, obviously Matt Painter did the right thing for himself and his alma mater. And while, yeah, would have been great to have had him at Missouri, I think it's kind of tough to blame him for anything that went down there, especially when, again, he's a Purdue lifer. Seems like he's going to be there forever. What are you going to do? And so that was a little look at Mizzou's past. How about Mizzou's future? Part of it could be former Iowa point guard Tony Perkins. And, well, I say former, I suppose anyone who enters the transfer portal, as we saw with Caleb Brown, for instance, last year at Missouri, you can always put your name back or withdraw your name for the portal and return to your other school, assuming said school will have you back, right? Well, I think Iowa would take Tony Perkins back for sure. But regardless, that young man in the portal, and you see a lot of contacts out there on the interwebs, on X.com, guys. There'll be reports out there saying, hey, Missouri's been in contact with 35 different players or something like that. But when somebody actually gets to campus, well, then you know it's pretty serious. And more often than not, it seems like when guys get to campus, majority of the time, they're probably going to end up in a Missouri uniform. Certainly exceptions to this, but Tony Perkins, a 6'4" point guard, I would say not a great shooter or scorer whatsoever, but certainly one of the best assist men in the Big Ten. And at 6'4", you do like that size, defensively in particular. But the lack of scoring and shooting there is a little bit troublesome. Perhaps Dennis Gates feels like him and his staff can improve his shooting, as they've done with several other people in their 2 years here at Missouri. Also, another notable player, South Dakota State's Zeke Mayo, who I talked about on Friday's program, former Lawrence, Kansas native, birthplace in Lawrence. I asked all of you, hey, do you care if he's from Lawrence or not? Surprisingly, didn't get a lot of people who took the bait there, saying that no one from Lawrence could ever be a Missouri Tiger, that kind of deal. I don't know, maybe you all are just more rational than I thought, or perhaps it is the waning bloodlust in the Missouri-Kansas rivalry after all of these years. And I'll tell you what, folks, I did get a lot right with my bracket this year, as I said at the top of the show, and we'll get into that. But one thing I did get wrong is one of the three teams I highlighted as not being good enough defensively is also the only team I didn't get correct in my Final Four. So let's talk about Alabama coming up here in just a little bit. And frankly, just how heartbreaking it is that this team has basically the same profile as the 2012 Missouri Tigers. So let's talk about that here in just a little bit. Let's talk about Gametime, because there's definitely an event this month in St. Louis at the Chavez Center that I am putting off getting tickets to. I don't know if I'm going to have time to get to this event or not. But if I make the trip down to the AEW show to see Bryan Danielson and Will Ospreay, it's going to be with the Gametime app, because I'm often the type of guy who waits till the last second to get my deals. Well, you're going to get some great deals with the Gametime app. Again, just $50, $51 to be exact, to get in the Chavez Center here in a couple weeks. But regardless of what you're into, Major League Baseball, soccer, the whole deal, of course, the Cardinals and the Royals very much in full swing at this point. Priority last-minute deals. Save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater near you. Take all the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. And by the spring cleaning champions, Manscaped. This season, make sure to groom your carpets and the drapes with the leaders in below-the-waist grooming. Clear out that winter bush with Manscaped's Lawnmower 5.0 and watch your confidence bloom like the springtime flowers. Embrace the season and join the 10 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with our special offer. Go to manscaped.com and use code LOCKEDON for 20% off plus free shipping. After using Manscaped, I can finally say I have caught the spring fever. And you know what? Spring cleaning doesn't just apply to those nether regions. Get the full grooming experience with Manscaped's signature Beard Hedger Pro Kit plus Handyman Electric Face Shaver. Get 20% off and free shipping with the code LOCKEDON at manscaped.com. That's 20% off and free shipping with the code LOCKEDON at manscaped.com. Nothing like a little spring cleaning in your pants. Thanks for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen every day. And hey, hope you had a fun Easter weekend out there. For those of you who celebrate, though, even if you're not a big Easter person, maybe you're not Christian or whatever it might be, I don't know how, if you have young kids, you can possibly escape the lure of the Easter Bunny. My 4-year-old is the perfect age to be delighted by the Easter Bunny. My 2-year-old is the perfect age to be terrified of the Easter Bunny. Apparently, I'm the perfect age to be delighted by both of those particular phenomenons. But getting back to basketball, I will say, again, I got a lot of things right on my bracket this year. 3 out of 4 in the Final Four. Got to go back to 95 when I was a 12-year-old to chase that dragon to get 4 out of 4. I'll probably never do it again, but when I was 12, I got the job done somehow. But the one I missed this year, Alabama. They were one of 3 teams that I simply just didn't think was good enough defensively to make a Final Four run, along with Kentucky and Illinois. Well, Illinois obviously got closer than Kentucky, right? But so, 2 out of 3 there isn't bad either. But of course, what makes me angry is that this 2024 Alabama team has basically the exact same profile, if not slightly worse, than 2012 Missouri's, who of course famously lost to 15th seeded Norfolk State in the first round. I still have not gotten over that game, nor the game in Allen Fieldhouse, and frankly, I never will. But here's the annoying part. Again, to my point there, Alabama ranked 12th in the country according to Ken Palm's rankings. This is after a Final Four run, by the way. Missouri was actually 7th, and that was after losing to Norfolk State. So Alabama actually the benefit there of a real March run, unlike the Tigers, a March Madness run, I should say. Obviously, the Tigers did win the Big 12 tournament that year. But to my point, Alabama 3rd overall in the country in offense, 104th in defense. Well, the Tigers previously in 2012, 1st, the absolute best cream of the crop offense in the country, but 111th in defense. So really just about the exact same profile there. So of course, even though those teams are basically the same, Missouri gets bounced by a red-hot Norfolk State team, and Bama makes its first run to the Final Four ever. Fan-freaking-tastic. Aren't you just happy for those Tide fans? Aren't you just thrilled for them? Isn't it wonderful? Well, I guess you do kind of have to be a little bit happy for Zach Edey and Purdue. Speaking of Matt Painter, because especially for Edey, after National Player of the Year, guy loses along with his teammates in the first round of the tournament to a 16 seed. And, well, my theory about, hey, when I picked Virginia the year after they lost as a 1 seed to a 16 against UMBC, well, they won the national championship the following year, as I predicted. Well, I predicted this season Purdue was going to run it back as Virginia did and do the same thing. Now, they still got a ways to go. Still got to win 2 more, especially one against an incredible UConn team to win the whole thing. But obviously, Zach Edey had some real big-time, nobody believed in us, screw you kind of vibes. I mean, that Boilermaker squad, including Edey, had as big of a chip on your shoulder as you possibly could. So I really think my Purdue-Virginia theory remains pretty strong right now. And when it comes to Missouri, if you think about that 2012 Missouri squad, what if they had, I don't know, for whatever reason they had COVID-19 the previous season or something, and they got the free year? My point is, what if that Missouri team with Denman and Ratliff and English and Dixon and Pressey, what if they had all been able to come back the very next year? At least the lion's share of those guys were back for another season. You're telling me they wouldn't have had that same type of chip on their shoulder? You're telling me they wouldn't have had something to prove to after that Norfolk State game? I don't know, just something interesting to think about. And also interesting to think about that what if that Missouri job, if Anderson would have stayed one more season with all of those seniors? That's certainly a plausible thing. If the Arkansas job would have just opened up 1 year later, is the fact that Missouri was going to the SEC, does that make the job more appealing to Matt Painter? Maybe it makes it less appealing. I don't know. You'd have to ask him. But another just interesting variable to think about from a really interesting time. A lot of different changes in Missouri sports history. And we don't talk a ton about Missouri women's basketball in this program, but Robin Pingeton is set to return next season. And this makes me pretty confident in a take I had about Desiree Reed-Francois. So I want to tell you all about that coming up here in just a little bit. But you know what? You know my favorite thing about my Fire TV is you can throw it in your backpack, your suitcase, wherever you might be traveling, and you'll have your TV with you at all times. You won't need to sign into a million different passwords and devices and platforms. No, it's all going to be signed up because it's your device and it'll fit really literally right in your pocket. And Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. And of course, the Fire TV stick. That's what I'm talking about, baby. Plug it into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV, as well as free and live TV, and not just sports. We're talking news, entertainment. Heck, we're talking cooking videos, all kinds of stuff. Not to mention, you got to check out Major League Baseball, March Madness, NBA. It's all on Fire TV. And check out the Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you got to. Just trust me on this. To learn more, visit Amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. So in a move that would have been unthinkable really just a couple months ago, Missouri women's basketball coach Robin Pingeton is reportedly set to return, playing out the last season of her contract in what is a very, very, very unusual move in really just about any major conference in any sport of any consequence whatsoever. To not have beyond 1 year on your contract, well, what does that do for your ability to recruit? This is basically unheard of in today's landscape. And according to Gabe DeArmond of Power Mizzou, he said he's, quote, very confident that Pingeton would have been fired had Desiree Reed-Francois still been here. If that whole saga with her leaving for Arizona, if that didn't happen, if she's still with Missouri, there's basically very little doubt that Pingeton would not be here. In fact, the reporting was that she had a mandate, basically make the NCAA tournament or bust, or else you're gone. Obviously, the Tigers came up well short of that particular landmark this season. So the thing is, to me, this is neither fish nor fowl. This puts the women's basketball program in purgatory. To me, extending Robin Pingeton would have made much more sense than what we're doing. Now, I'm not saying that's the move that I would have made, but to me, you either have to get behind her and say, hey, this is our gal, she's our coach, we're going to put the support behind her, or you get rid of her. This whole thing, this wishy-washy thing of, oh, well, I guess we'll just roll her over to the next season since we can't really decide on our athletic director yet. We're certainly not going to decide on a women's basketball coach either. I just don't, what is this signaling to the rest of the country? Well, what it signals is that you don't care about women's basketball, which on one hand is somewhat understandable. It is a non-revenue sport, right? But at the same time, I think there's certainly potential for this Missouri women's program to be more popular than it is. We saw during the Sophie Cunningham era that you could get some more interest in this program. Sellouts, bigger crowds at I'm saying the occasional sellout, close sellouts, like for the South Carolina game, that type of deal. There's some real interest there, without a doubt, when the team is actually winning. And here's the thing. To me, women's basketball, a much, much easier fix, potentially, than, say, Missouri baseball. Because it's quite simple. Missouri's baseball facilities, for example, just compared to the rest of the SEC, are simply not up to snuff. Now, when it comes to fan support, I think those two sports are pretty similar. But the advantage that Missouri women's basketball, of course, has is that there's a Missouri men's basketball team, and they can use all of the same facilities, Mizzou Arena, the practice facilities, all of this stuff. It's all there, and it's all top-notch for the most part. So there really isn't that much infrastructure spending or that kind. You don't have to change the entire face of Missouri women's basketball to make it better. You just have to change the literal face that's in charge of the program. Find the right person to lead this program, because it's not as though you need like millions of dollars in NIL to put together a decent starting five for women's basketball. You just need a coach who knows what they're doing, quite frankly. So to me, if I were if I were as diehard of a Missouri women's basketball fan as I am a men's basketball fan, I would be furious at this, because this is basically you saying we're giving up on the program. We're just basically saying, hey, if it weren't for Title IX, we wouldn't even want a women's basketball program. So if that's what you want, then just shutter the program, I guess. But to me, I don't think that's an option, number one, because of Title IX and the various accounting you have to do there, yada, yada, yada. But number two, again, you've already got the arena. You've got the practice facilities. You've got everything you need there for a solid program. You just need to find the right coach. And to me, punting there, which is basically what Missouri is doing, to me, you're punting on 4th and 1 from the opponent's 30-yard line. That just doesn't make any sense. You got to go for it and try, or else why even play the sport? That's my question. Ultimately, though, I do think, again, this is another example of how the powers that be, other than Desiree Reed-Francois, really don't care about anything outside of the revenue sports. And there's an argument to be made for that. But my main point here is that obviously Desiree Reed-Francois didn't feel that way. She felt like every program is important and that every program that wins and does better, that reflects well on the university. Rising tide lifts all boats, whatever cliche you want to use there. I think there's valid points to be made on both sides of those arguments. My main point is I think that once again, this whole Robin Pingeton fiasco, as I'm going to call it here, I think this shows the obvious just schism. I keep overusing that word, but the obvious just break in alignment. The Desiree Reed-Francois had a completely different idea of how the non-football, non-men's basketball sports should operate. And it seems like ultimately that's what led to her departure as much as anything. So, hey, appreciate you all not departing early on this episode. Appreciate you sticking with me here to the end and sticking with me every day here, your team every day here at Locked On Mizzou, as we like to say. So, until next time, I am John Miller, and thanks for listening to Locked On Mizzou.